That was
Yes.
2020?
1920. 2019.
Okay, we're going to get started for the Town of Branford Board of Finance meeting for February 24th, 2025. And I just make a note that Yvette Laurie, who's our one of our members, is out of the country, and she's coming in by Zoom on this computer. So, first on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the January 27th, 2025 meeting.
Move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff.
Second.
Harry, thank you. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Second is citizens' comments. If anyone from the audience would like to address any of the agenda items, they're welcome to do so now. John?
No shit.
You just identify yourself there, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Hartwell, RTM member from the 5th District and chair of the Ways and Means Committee on the RTM. As you know, the RTM's budget meeting last May, at that meeting we requested that the Board of Finance mitigate the 2024 tax increase by bringing forward a greater amount of the undesignated fund. We were pleased that you listened to our request and increased the draw from the rainy day fund by $680,000, which softened the tax increase that had resulted from the budget. Looking at tonight's agenda, I see that you're now considering a $10 to $11 million draw from the rainy day fund to pay for some items in advance rather than putting them in the operating budget. Additionally, you may also assign an additional $6 million of fund balances for other needs, like offsetting potential shortfalls in federal government grants to our schools, which is a concern that I raised recently in a letter to the editor. I believe the RTM will support these moves and work with the administration, with the Board of Education, and yourselves in this challenging time, keeping taxes as low as possible while delivering the high-quality services that our town deserves is everyone's objective. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to address the board? Okay. If not, we'll go to item number 3, 4, 5, and 6, and we will have a presentation by the Focus Partners with regards to the Town of Branford's Police Pension Fund Plan for the quarter ended December 31st, 2024, and that'll followed by the other post-employment benefits, trust, portfolio, and after that, the volunteer fire pension plan, and then the wrap-up will be the Coastal Resiliency Fund. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening to the Board of Finance. I see you have a very full agenda this evening, so I will try and be as brief as I can. We'll start with our acronym as we developed each quarter, which is FIRST, starting with F for fiscal policy, I for inflation, R for ratios, S for spenders, also known as consumers, and then a little bit of a phrase for the final T, which is tune out the forecasts. So starting with fiscal policy. We certainly are well aware that the fiscal policy is a contentious topic in Washington, but without getting into too much kind of opinion on it, there are a couple of points that I think are noteworthy. One is we're at a point where, for the first time in our history, our interest costs, or basically the cost of servicing our debt, exceeds our defense budget. So it just, I think, is kind of an interesting and sobering data point. In addition to that, despite so much talk about reducing reducing expenses in Washington and what have you, the fact is much of the federal budget remains non-discretionary. And if we look at the various entitlement programs, particularly Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, on a relative basis, the weight of those on the federal budget in the 1960s, those accounted for about 30% of our budget. Today, they account for about 60% of our budget, and of course, the numbers are significantly larger. On the inflation front, we continue to move in the right direction. We've been getting some conflicting data over the past month or so. But on balance, inflation continues to abate. We continue to see in 2024 really the main drivers of inflation were auto insurance and housing. We don't anticipate that either of those will really come in dramatically anytime soon. We know that we have a housing shortage, and we certainly know that as cars get more and more complex, they become more and more expensive to repair. And so we anticipate there'll be continued to see some stress there. One interesting bit, the price of eggs, of course, is a hot topic these days. Just noteworthy, I saw someone sliced and diced the numbers at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Eggs account for about 0.1% of the inflation calculation, so they're not having a significant impact on the top line number. As far as ratios, I just wanted to talk a little bit about ratios of relative returns, and we'll see this when we go through the performance. Since 2022, large cap stocks have had roughly twice the return of small cap stocks, and we're at a point now where, by historic standards, large cap growth stocks are significantly more expensive than they have been. The 25-year average of those is about 26 times their earnings. Right now they're trading at about 37 times their earnings. That doesn't mean that we're going to revert back to the mean tomorrow, certainly, but what it does is further evidence and further support for some of the volatility that we've seen more recently. If these firms don't really continue to deliver, the market is likely not going to be kind when we see shortfalls. As far as spenders or consumers are concerned, the consumer remains stubbornly strong and is out there spending and continues to be out there spending, and that's good for the broader economy. What's a little greater cause for concern is when we look at credit card debt, and we've all seen the headlines. Credit card debt, I think, is up to $1.2 trillion, but more significantly is that the number of folks that are making minimum payments is up to about 10.75%, and that is the highest number that it's been since 2012. So we are starting to see little bits of evidence combined with a slight decrease in consumer confidence and in labor confidence that there may be some thunderclouds on the horizon a bit for the consumer. But lastly, we want to just wrap up with tune out the forecasts, and I think it's very important, and this is something that this Board of Finance is well aware of, but focus on what you know and what you can control, which are things such as your tolerance for risk, your funding policies, et cetera, because there's a tremendous amount of data out there, and the market doesn't always act the way you would expect it to. And so it's important, especially since your pension plan has been reopened a number of years ago. Your liabilities are very, very long. And so I would just encourage everyone, whether it's for their personal finance or for pools of assets over fiduciaries, to try and tune out the forecast as best we can. Ray Dalio, who of course I'm sure most everyone knows his name, a billionaire hedge fund manager from Southern Connecticut, had a great quote that kind of stuck with me, and I think it's worth repeating, and that is, "He who lives by the crystal ball is destined to eat shattered glass." And I think it's just a reminder that it's very, very difficult to predict the future, and certainly to do so with any consistency.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay, so with that, let's turn to our books if we could, please, and we will start on tab 2, which is the Police Pension Fund. We had a little bit of a negative return in the fourth quarter. U.S. equities performed positively. International equities were negative for the quarter, and fixed income was negative for the quarter. Right after the presidential election results came through, there was a fair amount of concern in the fixed income market that some of the proposed policies may be inflationary, and so consequently interest rates spiked up a bit, and so we saw a little bit of negative return. We'll talk a little bit in a moment on how that's really not detrimental to the pension plan in our view. But on page 19, starting with the 35,000-foot view, we can see the return, the annualized return on the right has been at 5.61% going back to inception, just slightly below our benchmark return of 5.68%, and that's come with about 7% less volatility, as indicated by the portfolio beta. So when we look at the portfolio alpha, or measure of value added, we still see a slight positive number. That number will never be particularly large, especially for a pool of assets managed similarly to this. this because we don't have an expectation of a lot of excess return because so much of the portfolio is either the equities are passively invested and the fixed income is managed to offset a certain number of your liabilities. So that slight positive number is really what we would like to see going forward. In dollars and cents, you can see at the bottom of page 19, although slight negative returns and negative investment change for the last 3 months. When we look back for the trailing 1 year, we started 2024 at $29,491,000. We had about $645,000 worth of withdrawals and $1.85 million in earnings. Longer term, the beginning value on 4/1/03 was $8.3 million. We've had about $950,000 in net withdrawals, and the market has provided $23 million in earnings, bringing us to the ending value of $30,697,000. Since the end of the quarter, we've had a little bit of appreciation in the portfolio, about $97,000 in inflows and just under $2 million in outflows or benefit payments, and $1.83 million in earnings. So the value as of Friday's close was $31,077,000. As far as the asset allocation is concerned, we're really right on target, if you will. We're just 6 basis points behind the fixed income target and about 1.7% ahead of the equity target because of the relative strength of the equity markets more recently, and we're a little bit underweight in cash. But we anticipate being underweight in cash at this point in the year since we pre-fund cash for benefit payments in anticipation of the next contribution coming in at the beginning of the next fiscal year or in July. Okay. So there's no recommendation to rebalance the portfolio today. And then just the last comment I wanted to make is on page 18. If we, I mentioned that fixed income struggled a bit during the quarter as interest rates have come up, and you can see that put a negative return of minus 5.39%. But it is noteworthy that you, of course, have hold the individual bonds. You don't have a bond fund per se, and so all your bonds have fixed maturity values or par values, as they're known. So while we've seen a little bit of a decline in value of the bonds, it's important to remember that the bond portfolio is structured to offset a certain number of years of liabilities, and the bonds will tend to mature back to their par value. So the closing value of the bond portfolio was $13,788,000, but the par value is just over $1 million more than that at $14,844,000. So we'll kind of have that natural appreciation as bonds mature. Okay.
Thanks. Any questions on this?
Okay, so moving on to tab 2, we can discuss the OPEB. Very similar experience, although a slightly higher equity allocation for the OPEB. On page 37, we can look at the longer-term returns. At 5.09%, that's going back to July of 2011, slightly behind the benchmark, which was at 5.25%, and that's come with about 13% less volatility. So again, we have that positive alpha or value added at 0.04 that you can see. In dollars and cents, the OPEB started with $4 million on July 1st, 2011. Since that time, there have been contributions of $23,672,000 and earnings of $12.23 million, bringing us to the value of just under $40 million, where we are at where we were at the end of the year. And similarly, the OPEB has seen some appreciation since the end of the year, and about $688,000 of appreciation, and of course there have been net outflows because benefit payments are being made from the OPEB of $280,000, and so their value as of Friday's close was $40,350,000. Similarly to the pension, we're quite close to our asset allocation targets, and no recommendation to rebalance the OPEB this evening.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay. Great.
All set with that? Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's move on to the volunteer fire plan. This is a very similar experience, and that's on tab 4, excuse me, page 54. Very similar portfolio to that of the police pension plan, with the one exception that because it's a smaller pool of assets, it has a bond index fund rather than individual bonds. And this money was, of course, separated from the combined police and fire pension back in December of 2015. On page 54, we can see the return annualized at 5.79% versus a benchmark of 6.15, which has come with about 6% less volatility, and that translates to an alpha basically at zero or flat. In other words, we've had performance on par with the risk quotient. The relative underperformance and relative low volatility in the OPEB is really a function of just the way it's been funded and in the dollar cost averaging. But we've dollar cost averaged starting with a much lower base, so the cash has a bigger impact at any given point in time, or at least it has until the OPEB was heavily funded more recently. In terms of, or since the end of the year rather, really no contributions or withdrawals to the fire pension, other than some ancillary for fees and the like, and then earnings of about $54,700, which brings us to an ending value of $1,854,000, and again very close to our policy benchmarks. We're underweight in fixed income by about 1.5%, overweight in equities by about 1.25%, and overweight in cash by about 0.25%. So again, no recommendation to rebalance this portfolio as well.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
Looks all set on this.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So then we can move on to the Coastal Resiliency Fund, which is tab 5. This fund a little more restricted in the way that it's invested because of statute. So this fund is about 68% in fixed income, about 32% in equities, and on page 67 we can see that in the relatively short history of the Coastal Resiliency Fund, we just crossed the 3-year mark at last October. The return has averaged 2.07%, ahead of its benchmark at 1.62, and the portfolio volatility has been about 10% less than that of the benchmark. So that leads to that positive alpha or value added you see of 0.05. Much like the pension, but kind of the opposite, we would expect that number to come in because the Coastal Resiliency is passively invested for the most part. In terms of dollars and cents, going back to 10/1 of 21, we can see that the original balance was $1,925,000, about $828,000 in contributions, and just under $205,000 in earnings, bringing us to a year-end value of $2,958,000. And since the end of the year, no contributions and withdrawals, and just over $39,000 in earnings. So our closing value on Friday was $2,995,500. And here we are also close to our policy. Our policy is 65% in bonds. We're at 63.5% in bonds, and then similarly overweight to equities by about 1.5%.
Okay, thanks.
And then if I may make just one more comment.
Sure.
Tab 6. This is just a brief update on your fixed income manager, Mesero. Mesero announced, I believe it was either late last year or early January. I don't recall the specific date, but Mesero is selling off. Mesero is an asset manager, and the majority of their businesses are what are commonly referred to as alternatives, hedge funds, and the like. And they are divesting of their traditional asset classes. So the team that manages your fixed income portfolio is being acquired by MetLife. That is scheduled to close February 28th. So that it's next week. We anticipate that will happen. We discussed this with the finance director. All the contracts will be assigned, so it doesn't require any action on your part. We don't have any concerns about this. The team that you work with at Mesero, the team that works on your portfolio, is going over to MetLife, and so it'll be managed in a substantially similar way. The potential upside to it is MetLife, of course, is a much larger organization, and so theoretically they may have access to more bonds and the like, but for practical purposes, we really view this as sort of a non-event, and so long as that we continue to have the same team that's making decisions and continue to have access to them, we're comfortable with the change at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Any questions? Jim? Thank you.
Yeah, this one, Michael, is for you, and since I'll be talking a lot tonight, maybe you could speak to it. Later on this agenda, there is a request before the board to put additional money into these two funds, the CRF and the pension fund. The CRF, as you've described, is pretty much outlined by statute in terms of how those new dollars will be invested. We've talked about with Michael, and we've talked with the actuary. If this item were to get approved by the Board of Finance and the RTM, what sort of things that we're looking at, and one of the things potentially that we'd be looking at a future meeting is to at least look at perhaps changing the investment policy, but those are some things we're looking at. But Michael can walk through the whole list of things we've been looking at, because we've been discussing it probably multiple times in the last, I would say, month or so.
Yep.
So.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Jim.
So, just to echo or expand upon what Mr. Finch said, should the Board of Finance and the RTM approve this additional funding for the pension, we modeled out a number of different things, and ultimately came to the conclusion that because of the way Branford has long managed its pension, with an eye or an ear towards liabilities, more so than just pure asset performance, our recommendation is, and based on a fair amount of analysis and back and forth, would be that if you do move forward with this, those dollars, we would suggest, assuming that there's not a significant change to the yield curve between now and then, that those dollars be invested in fixed income. And the idea essentially is that we're at a point now where for the first time in many years, we're able to get some yield from our bond portfolio, somewhere in the probably 4.5% to 5% or so range with your mix of treasuries and corporate bonds, and so using what we did was we worked with the finance director as well as the actuary, and looked at the current yield curve and basically discounted your projected liabilities back to today. And so you've long had certain liabilities immunized, as it's called. But what's happened is, as interest rates came down from really from 2007 or so until the end of COVID, the amount of liabilities that you can immunize went down because you're getting lower rates. Well, now we've taken steps to lengthen the duration of the portfolio and to immunize more liabilities as rates have come up, and this would be an opportunity to potentially do that. To further do that, right now, just to kind of put it in context, and forgive me as I've got a lot of paper here, so just one moment, please. Sorry. Right now, based on the current allocation to fixed income, you're immunizing approximately 6 years of liabilities, slightly less. If the proposed funding to the pension is approved and we were able to invest at today's rates, we're looking at being able to immunize closer to 9 years of liabilities, assuming that those dollars are allocated to fixed income. It's also noteworthy that although historically we would think that more fixed income would reduce your return expectations, we went through the asset allocation study process, and so we would bring the target fixed income from its current 55% to 62.5%. That's just the way the math works out with the contribution that's being proposed, and in that would not do significant, have a significant issue with your expected return. We reviewed that with the actuary. The actuary was comfortable with it because it's sort of a strategic plan, if you will, and quite frankly, over the past 6 months or so, we've seen return expectations for fixed income actually come up a little bit as rates have come up, because a good indicator as to what your bond return will be is kind of the yield that you buy in at when you make a purchase. And so just sort of to make a long story short, if we were to do that at current assumptions, the long-term expected return for the asset allocation will be at 6.4%, which is consistent with what your actuary is projecting. So, for what it's worth, we as your investment consultant think this is a wise decision. Branford, of course, has a pristine credit rating, and with a fully funded OPEB, you're one of just a handful in the state that have that, and a very diligent pension funding, but overfunding it would allow you to immunize more liabilities as you've taken on more liabilities when you reopened the plan, while at the same time it should reduce the funding requirements in years going forward, because you're starting with a bigger principal balance, if you will.
Sure. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Very good information. Questions from Michael on this? Yvette, do you have any questions?
Sorry, unmuting. No, I'm understanding. It's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Okay, item number 7 is to consider and appropriate approve a transfer request from the Director of Human Resources pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement for the police union contract and dispatcher's contract for 2025. There's a request to transfer from contingency $1,124,507 into various accounts, wages and salaries, $555,369, overtime, $46,864, public events, $7,660, vacation, $17,763, holiday pay, $20,933, sick pay, $10,104, retroactive wages, $457,134, and accrued payroll expense, $8680, for a total of $1,124,507. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you, Joe. Glad to be here at this final phase of these 3 contract negotiations and asking for your approval for the transfers. The first, obviously, is for the police and the dispatcher's contract, because they're treated as one department. That accounts for the monies that we're asking for in transfer. These monies requested have, of course, been reviewed by First Selectman and the Director of Finance, so we're comfortable in our recommendations at this time. Request a transfer request.
Thank you. So what it is we'll approve the transfer, and then we've got actually a resolution we'll take after the next agenda, item number 8. So why don't we move on item number 7?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff,
I'll second.
second by Pam, seconded by Yvette. We'll give her that. And Harry, you okay? Yeah. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And so item number 8 is to consider and if appropriate approve a request from the Director of Human Resources pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement for the water treatment union contract for 2025. And it's, again, a transfer from contingency $77,272, transfer out to the sewer utility fund for the same amount. Excuse me. And then within the utility fund, there'll be a transfer in of $77,272, wages and salaries of an increase in the expenditures for wages and salaries $44,827, overtime $7891, retroactive wages $24,382, and accrued payroll expenses $172, a total $77,272. Jim, what's the contingency balance?
Okay, it's a little trickier tonight. It's the first time we're actually appropriating money into contingency and out of contingency. But when you net all of that out, Joe, the balance in contingency will be $539,924.
$539,924?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Margaret? Any comments on this?
And again, very pleased to be here to finalize this final contract. These are retroactive adjustments going back to July 1st of 2023. And we request the transfers.
Back to 2023 for both of them, right?
2021 for the police
For
and
police.
dispatch,
Okay.
police and dispatchers, and 23 for the water
And the
treatment.
RTM has approved all of these.
Absolutely, as well as the administrative committees associated
Okay.
with those.
And what's the inherent rates in these?
Again, a little bit trickier than usual. For the water treatment, we had overall 2.5% increase
Yeah.
retroactively. And then for the police and dispatchers, 2.5%. This year, we had a retention adjustment included for a total of 5.3% besides the general wage increase.
For the dispatchers
And police.
and police, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Questions on this from Margaret? Okay, somebody want to move this transfer?
Second.
Question and second, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And then I'm going to read this resolution for the utility fund. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM a transfer out of $77,272 to the sewer utility fund to fund salary changes pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement for the water treatment employees union. Transfer will increase the fiscal 2025 budget in the sewer utility fund from $4,879,501 to $4,956,733. Do we want to move that one?
I'll move it.
Moved by Jeff.
Second.
Second by Harry. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Margaret. Okay. Next up is item number 9. And this is
It's for me.
This is Mr. Finch, but to consider if appropriate, approve a transfer from the finance director for the following: increase fund balance by $481,516 and increase in contingency for $481,516. I will read the resolution here proposed as resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in appropriations for fiscal 2025 general fund budget from $135,311,096 to $135,792,612. This increase will be funded through an appropriation from fund balance to be used to supplement the contingency account to cover retroactive wages. And Jim has provided a backup letter for that. Jim, you want to touch on this one for us?
Sure. Basically, when looking at Margaret's transfer, you'll see that there's retroactive wages. So those are wages for past years. And when we put the contingency budget together for this fiscal year, one of the things that we noted is, unlike some other years, what we estimated for retro back wages would basically come out of fund balance, because we were budgeting it in prior year's budgets. The contracts were unsettled. It flowed back to fund balance. So rather than to tax for it yet again, we said that for the retro years, we would take that out of fund balance. So this is consistent with our approach for adopting the 25 budget. And so that's why that piece is coming out of fund balance.
Got it. Questions from Jim? Somebody want to move it?
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff.
I'll second.
Second by Deborah. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Item number 10 is Board of Ed. To consider and if appropriate, approve additional appropriation request from the Board of Education for $300,000 to address a projected deficit in special ed out-of-district tuition. There'd be an increase in revenue, special ed, of $300,000, and increase in the BOE non-personnel account of $300,000. Proposed resolution would be resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in appropriations for the fiscal 2025 budget from $135,792,612 to $136,092,612. This increase would be funded through an increase in estimated revenues derived from excess cost reimbursements. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I travel with the team.
Yeah, you got your bodyguards with you.
So as indicated in the memo, we're anticipating a $300,000 deficit for special education due to out-of-district tuition that is much higher than anticipated. I invited Charles Ciccarella, our Director of Student Services, to provide some additional context if he would like. And I also want to point out that because we have these additional expenses, we're anticipating additional revenue on the town side with excess cost. And this will put us in a better position to make sure we're balancing our budget for the remainder of the year. I'll also invite Blaise if he wants to add some additional context there as well.
That's great, yeah. Sure. Chuck?
Sure, so when students have needs that require educational services that go beyond what the Board of Education can manage in our walls, in our district, we're obligated by law and really ethics and morals to find placements that would otherwise be able to service them. Those placements require tuition costs, and those tuition costs are pretty steep because the needs of these students cannot be managed in district, so they need specialized schools, smaller, more staff, more training, et cetera. So with that is a cost that comes with it. Once the district expends a certain amount of money per student, we are eligible for what they call the excess cost reimbursement from the state. Once we spend 4.5 times our per pupil cost, theoretically, it's about $103,000 right now. Once we cross that threshold on a student, we are eligible for, theoretically, a dime for dime return on our money. We never get a dollar for dollar from the state on that reimbursement, on that excess cost for that education. Typically, it ranges between 68 and 80%. We hit an all-time low in our reimbursement this fiscal year. And I believe, Blaise, was it 59.96%? So it was an all-time low.
Why is that?
I can, yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
We got a lot of microphones here.
Yeah, it's better.
The state, every year it runs, the state doesn't appropriate enough funds to cover excess costs. So we're legally entitled to 85% of the reimbursement, that's the law, but they don't appropriate enough funds, and so then they divide it equally amongst the actual allocation that they have. We all ended up at 59.96. This is everybody that's getting this in our peer group. So it's an all-time low. It is, for context, if you're following the governor's budget, it's one of the main things that he put funding for, an additional $40-something million specifically for excess cost to help fund this shortfall, but that doesn't actually take effect till fiscal 27. But the good news is there's definitely seems to be some momentum. For us still, even at the number that, at the 59.96%, we'll still receive, based on our very, a very accurate projection that Charles's team does, is it is really dollar for dollar, it's very formulaic. We're still expected to be significantly over what's currently budgeted by at least a minimum of $300,000. That's being very conservative. So it really should be much north of that. It actually kind of has been coming in north of that because we've sort of been seeing this increasing trend. But this year you'll see at least over what's currently budgeted by probably $300,000 to $500,000.
Okay.
Even at that's at the 59.96%. So we really should be where we normally would be, which would be closer to like a 72-ish%, 80. Yeah.
And to this end, there's an increasing need in the state, so more districts are applying for more students, and the tuition is going up, so that makes the percentage of our reimbursement go down. So it's more competition for less money with higher tuitions.
So what's a typical facility that provides this service that we don't when you go out of district?
The name of a facility?
Like, is it another municipality, or is it a...
For example, ACES.
So it's
Area
a private nonprofit or some other education?
So it's either a regional educational service center like ACES or a private facility like a Cedarhurst School, which is managed by Yale. So they're highly specialized.
Got it.
Chris, how many students do we have that are impacted by programs like this currently?
41 tuitioned this year. Some have returns. The active count is 38.
Thank you.
And you could be talking anywhere from sometimes if you're kind of fortunate around 50 to 70,000 a student, as north as, there's students that are $250,000, each. So based on the need, the tuitions range very significantly.
They do.
And the local school district in this model is responsible for both providing that tuition and for the transportation.
Correct.
Got it.
Expulsions also fall under this category, and so it's hard, you don't try not to anticipate too many expulsions, but that could change very quickly. So we can find out something happens, there are 2 or 3 more expulsions. That could be if the student's expelled for the maximum of 180 for 180 school days, which is a school year. That could be anywhere from 60 to 100,000 per student for the types of placements.
So you say if you expel someone from Branford school system, they are entitled to go somewhere else?
Yes. So once a student is expelled from Branford, that's a great question, because people often think they're out of school, not our responsibility. We're still responsible for their education.
Very expensive.
Okay.
So they could be at a facility or homebound?
Yes, homebound. The minimum you could provide as a school district is homebound tutoring 2 hours a day, so that's 10 hours a week of homebound. That's the minimum the district can provide if the student can appropriately receive their education that way. But if you think about a student who's being expelled, the chances of them being a good candidate for staying at home without supervision and getting 2 hours of tutoring a day is often unlikely.
Is that state mandated, Chris?
Yes.
What's the average cost per student at middle school or Branford High? 17, 18, 20,000 a year?
22.
Oh, 22. So it's about half the cost of the outbound.
Yeah, so the excess cost, that's that 4.5. That's the number that Charles, the 101,000, 104,000.
Right, that's about 103.
103,000. So.
Okay, other questions? Someone want to move this?
I will.
I'll second it.
Moved by Harry, seconded by Jeff. Additional discussion? All in favor? Okay, I think item number 11 is, thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Item number 11 is to act on requests from the Board of Education to reallocate capital projects. We have a memo from Chris and others. Do you want to go over it with us?
So we, obviously next month we'll be talking a lot about capital, I think, for the Board of Ed. So I think as a precursor to that, something that we're coordinating closely with the town and with our facilities department is doing a really extensive review of open capital. For some context, I think, we've had significant turnover, and then we were here recently about some capital. Brendan Letty, many of you have seen him here before. He is now getting really settled, into the role, having been through a full cycle. But we're really, I think you've probably seen a significant pickup in the capital we've executed, kind of over the last year in comparison to the execution rate maybe for the last few years. So we're getting caught up on kind of some open capital that's been building for a few years. As we are piecing together the capital program and really looking forward thinking, we're reorganizing things in what would maybe be a more effective way, especially with the open capital, and then trying to leverage some smart investments that will buy us a lot more time as we do the master plan. And we know the master plan, a lot of this work we're talking about will be like 10 to 15 years, potentially kind of before things realistically happen. So that's kind of how we're viewing the facilities. The first one is, it was and Brendan, you can cut in at any time. We had two open appropriations for just doing seal coating of the 2 elementary parking lots. And after further inspection by the facilities team, instead of just doing kind of more frequent seal coating, there's a preference to leverage the existing open appropriation and mill about 1.5 inches down and then repave and restripe, extending the life of the parking lot. We kind of have a reasonable idea about what that would cost, and merging these two open appropriations into the one would allow us to do that. We coordinate closely with DPW to see if we can leverage, existing work this summer or the Tilcon contract.
Yep.
Am I missing anything?
No, spot on. We kind of missed the window before with seal coating. These parking lots are beyond the life of a seal coat. They need to be at least milled and paved. There's an opportunity to overlay, but that's not really the best course of action either. We need to mill down 1.5 inches, 2 inches, and then come in with a top coat. And Blaze is right. We've coordinated with Public Works on some projects in and around town. We spoke last summer about Murphy. I've been in contact with Public Works to try to kind of leverage some of those state contracts and projects that are going on so we can kind of merge all these things together.
So this would be Murphy and Tisco?
Murphy and Tisco. Well, for this one, this would be for...
Just Murphy?
For Murphy, correct.
Okay, and what's the status with the Tisco one?
Tisco is in a similar boat, and we're anticipating to add that to capital moving forward.
Okay.
But we'd like to just reallocate this seal coating.
Gotcha. Next.
Parking lot. Okay, so Indian Next School, this is building on a reappropriation that you had recently just done. And so for the next two, we have a project that's specific to the boiler, but we'd like to loop that into a larger project that's about $101,000. This summer, instead of having specific tiny appropriations, loop the funding in. So it would allow us to do still the parking lot that Brendan had talked about there with the safety restriping, the entryway, as well as prep the building for full-day pre-K that will start this fall. It'll require us potentially moving a program out of one building into the other, and allow us to do some roof work that will hold the building over for at least the years to come while we figure out what we're doing with the master plan, as well as kind of fix a couple of the most critical millwork pieces that are sort of falling apart. This would also, instead, as we kind of broaden this project to allow us to have a little more flexibility, we had put in $50,000 for next year to prep the site for the full-day pre-K, so we would remove that request from next year's capital. It's the same thing. We had some savings on the facilities vehicle that we purchased this summer through capital, so we'd like to reappropriate that towards this project as well.
So the boiler's okay?
The boiler's okay, yeah. The boiler is fine. And some of this, the money isn't, it's going to better serve the operations of the building. The boiler is in good shape. The hot water heater needs to be replaced, which we have on, part of operating. But the boiler is okay for now. It's part of the grand master plan, but this money would help us to, in the day-to-day operations of the building. Better functionality, better, the programming that's coming in. It would allow us to work better within the building.
Great. Questions on this? Okay, and then the last piece of this is the tennis courts?
The last piece is the tennis court, and Peter, you can take this over if you want at all from me for some more background, but basically we have an open $90,000 appropriation. This is for the Tally Seapot, am I saying that right? Tally Seapot, Memorial Tennis Court Seating Project. And originally, BL Companies had provided there's a design and a quote, and it was $90,000. This is from a few years ago, and so escalation really should have been included in the Board of Ed's request at the time. Brendan did revisit with BL recently to kind of just get an update on that as we're getting ready to go out to bid, and for this summer, and the $90,000 is definitely short. And so we have some door funding. We've been really systematically replacing doors throughout the district on a cyclical program. Luckily, through a recent, significant cost savings on a project that we did, we can kind of leverage some of the open cap. We still have another 50-something thousand in open capital after we do this door project on April break. We
And we've
have summer door project.
Right, and we've just completed about $90,000 worth of door projects. So this is an abundance of door money that I think we have here that we would like to reallocate to this project. This, as Blaise said, we're trying to, thought we would have it for today, but have a cost analysis from BL. If we were at $90,000 for this project, it's not the project that was originally scoped and not the project that we'd be able to, we feel comfortable moving forward. So we need some more funding to be able to really let the project shine, as it should.
Okay, questions on the tennis court seating? Okay, so the three of these, I guess we will take this, you'll paste together some type of resolution, Lisa. So I get any questions from the board on the request to basically reallocate the $95,000 into the paving for Mary Murphy, the $35,000 to go to security upgrades, the $56,755 to go into that campus security upgrades, and $50,000 to go into the BHS Branford High School tennis court seating projects. What's your pleasure?
Joe, I'll move it. I feel they've done their due diligence to reallocate this money for these projects, and I think it's fair.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Second.
Is there a second? Second by Harry. Additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you.
Next is item number 12 is to review a report from the finance director discussing actions to consider in advance of the budget hearings and to act on the following items outlined in the letter. Now, Jim sent me a multi-page letter. It's a letter without pages, but it's a lot of page numbers. There's a lot of pages here. And had a good conversation over the past probably many months, but the last month and a half with Jamie and myself and Jim and others, and this is the outcome is Jim's research, not only at the GFOA level, but national level in addition to that, and discussion with other professionals. And I just want to comment on the really great approach, Jim, that you've worked on and strategy. And so with that, I'll let you walk through it. And thanks to you and Jamie to help put this together.
Okay, well, just by way of background, I think you might even say we started this this process back in January of '24 when we were looking at some of the town's financial needs. At that time, we were contemplating increases in the public safety departments. So we added the 16 EMTs and the 2 police officers, and so we wanted to look and see what our capacity was at that time. April of the same year, we were looking at what could be the potential impact of a revaluation. I referred to it as, at the last meeting, we didn't have any numbers in the changes in value, so it was deterministic, but what it did show is that that the revaluation was going to, in all likelihood, and it's been borne out, create a shift in residential property owners, to residential property owners. And that was also a consideration when the Board of Finance increased the $600,000 out of fund balance at the May meeting. That was discussed in advance of that meeting, at that April meeting, and also during that time period, we did this to also lower the tax increases, as was mentioned earlier. So it was like a 2% increase that year, and that was following, a 1.5% the year before and a 0 the year before that. So, we've been trying to be pretty good about the tax increases, knowing that, we had some challenges in the revaluation down the road. Last meeting we were at, if you heard me through my coughing, we talked about some of the strategies that the Board of Finance and the RTM could consider in advance of the budget process. And that was looking at reserves in a variety of areas. I think I said, you know, in a somewhat light phrase, you could almost play the fund balance game, fund balance as, and then fill in the blank. And some of those blanks were reducing liabilities. Some of those blanks were reducing future expenditures. Some of those blanks were looking at it in terms of revenues. We talked about possibly leveraging the town's ability for smaller bond issues where it made sense, and just to look at a variety of funding strategies. So this letter incorporates many, not all, but many of those strategies, and so it's outlined in a way that talks about the use of reserves. It also introduces something that we haven't done as much in Branford, and that is basically assigning fund balance. The assignment is sort of it's less than an appropriation, but you're basically acknowledging that you're putting money aside for the resources. This is sort of depending on how you look at it, a good or bad analogy, but the way I would explain it to folks who haven't heard these terms before is, I'll use myself as an example. I graduated from college, and as far as my dating life goes, I'm unassigned. Okay, so I mean, I'm not assigned to anything or anyone. Then I meet someone. I meet my wife Mary, and we start dating, and we get engaged. So now I'm assigned. I'm basically, that's it, right? But there's still another process, right? There's the appropriation process, which is like the wedding process. Once I get married, I'm committed. So if you think of unassigned, assigned, committed as, you know, single, engaged, married. I always thought that was a good analogy to kind of keep the concept straight. So hopefully it faithfully represents some of the things that we're trying to do here. And so I think probably I will take this in pieces. There's a lot here. And so the first item on the agenda is, which would be item 12, which starts talking about this. And this would be appropriating $475,000 out of fund balance for police technology. And the Board of Finance had heard requests from the police department in the past. Most recently, the dashboard cameras for the cars was one. And the reason it came to the Board of Finance was because of pursuant to 42.1 of our state of our town code. Obligations which are greater than $10,000 in multiple years would come to the Board of Finance for an advisory opinion for the Board of Selectmen. So that was done for the dash cams, and then the body cameras and the tasers and were also expiring. And so, yeah, there's newer technology upgrades and software, etc. And the vendor that the police department uses for this, both the dash cams and the body cams and the tasers, is a company called Axon. They're a technology company specializing in law enforcement and public safety solutions. And essentially, the renewal prices they're getting are basically, you know, it would be just rounding up about $900,000 for a period of years. And so the thought here is, like we've done when we've had other type of significant purchases that occur over time, is to set up a sinking fund for the police technology. And so what I've outlined is priming this sinking fund with $475,000, and then the operating budget through the IT budget would then be funding approximately $100,000 for next year, as opposed to, you know, funding what would be, normally required without that. Which, so the body cameras and tasers, for example, would be, 166, and then the dash software would be 57. So instead of spending $223, we'd start with 100, but we have the 475 priming it, and then you can see what this effectively does is it smooths out the appropriations over a period of years. There's another sheet in the attachment which basically shows the increases in some of it in the initial contract, and then you have the projected renewals, and then you have even after that. Just trying to look out over a period of years. Obviously, when those contracts come up, they could be higher increases. Somewhat arbitrarily, I use 7%. The current contract we have has 4% escalators each year. So again, I put the 7% in, to put an escalator in, and there may be some product enhancements as well. Not an expert at pricing public safety technology, so it is an approach, but it's obviously like any of these sinking funds, you have to evaluate them on a year-to-year basis. So
Jim, yeah, thank you. Why don't we do this? We'll pause and follow the agenda so that we can take care of this resolution and we'll move on to the next one. So that's good information, and as Jim said, there's that worksheet in the back that demonstrates what Jim put together with the chief on this. Are there questions on the concept, or if we want, then if it's okay, I'll read this proposed resolution. Resolve that the Board of Finance recommend to the RTM an increase in appropriations for fiscal '25 general fund budget from $136,092,612 to $136,567,612. This increase will be funded through an appropriation from fund balance and used to establish a police technology fund.
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff.
I'll second.
Seconded by, I think Pam got in there first, so we'll give that one to Pam. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so then next on is to consider and if appropriate, approve a transfer and resolution to supplement the Board of Ed lease fund for school technology. And that's for following the same concept, correct, Jim?
yeah, basically, a number of years ago, we established the lease fund for a couple things. The primary driver of it was trying to come up with a logical and budget-sensitive plan for the school technology purchases. And so the school technology purchases basically end up replacing laptops every 3 years, and then they have various grades in which they're doing the Chromebooks. Currently, in this program, these products get given back at the end of the lease term. We don't actually own them, so they're not, we don't, they get refreshed. The contracts typically involve the equipment. There's an insurance component with them as well. And, kind of looking out and talking with the Board of Ed and what they're looking at in their budget next year, as well as what we're looking at, it's clear to me that we would have a shortfall. So what the $250,000 does is it at least gets us through fiscal '27. And so I did do an attachment, just rounded up a little bit. You could see for you got the for July 25, which is fiscal year 26, the budget that we're talking about. The estimates are basically $122,000 per year for the Chromebooks, 4 years, and $120,300 for the staff laptops. And then we're looking at out at 26, which is fiscal year 27, and then July 27, which is fiscal year 28. Also looking, saying, well, what if those went up to 130,000 from 122 and 140,000 from 130? Again, no guarantees. We don't know what the state of the world's going to be, the state of our trading partners, et cetera, but nevertheless, it forms a framework for a plan, and that plan really hinges on the $250,000 out of fund balance.
Got it. Okay, so this would increase okay, the increase of fund balance of 250,000 and increase on the revenue side, and then the increase, the expenditure for a transfer out to the lease fund of 250,000. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in appropriations for fiscal 2025 general fund budget from $136,567,612 to $136,817,612. This increase will be funded through an appropriation from fund balance and be used to increase the contribution to the lease fund for the Board of Ed computer devices. That is the proposed resolution.
I'll move it, Joe.
Moved by Jeff,
I'll second.
Second.
seconded by Deborah. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And next, to consider and if appropriate, approve or transfer and resolution to supplement the Coastal Resiliency Fund. So that's your next piece, Jim.
Yep. Okay. The Coastal Resiliency Fund was something that we created back in 2019. In addition, that was the year where we also worked with our state delegation, primarily Christine Cohn, Senator Christine Cohn, who was the co-chair of the Environmental Committee. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with it, because I know we have had a reconstituted board over the last couple of years, is that basically, the approach that Branford has taken is that, we have climate change exposures. Those are liabilities. They're not measured as, in any way precisely like pension liabilities or OPEB liabilities. The Government Finance Officers Association, the National Association, is looking at that as one of their project lists. It actually, they've reached out to me, so I probably talking to them in March to see if anything we're doing here could possibly be useful to them. No guarantees, but again, it doesn't cost them anything to ask. It doesn't cost me anything to talk to them. So it's probably worth that. And so again, the whole premise of this was to set money aside, try to have that money grow at a rate that's faster than inflation, and then use those dollars potentially as another funding source in addition to, say, bonding, grants, or pay-as-you-go projects. Now, the initial reaction to this might be, well, okay, well, you're going to actually reduce funding to the Coastal Resiliency Fund next year. And the answer is yes. However, that I've sent an attachment to the memo. It pretty much follows almost exactly kind of the format that I used to introduce the concept back in 2019, and it's a very similar format that we used when making testimony to the legislature. And so, just to give you a way of background, it really shows, okay, here's what we would be doing if we did our incremental approach going forward. We would appropriate $3,685,000 into the fund. Made some assumptions about the return, 6%, and also we don't want the fund to get used up. So when we first set it up, we talked about maybe a maximum draw of 15% of the available balance, and this assumes that you're drawing the money out every year, which hasn't been the case so far. But what it does show is when you do the supplemental appropriation, you basically ratchet down your contribution, and then you increase the contribution $15,000 a year, and then you'll see that by 2035, you will have actually put in more money into the fund than you would have with the incremental approach. And also, if you were taking out 15% a year, you'd have $5.2 million to withdraw versus 4.8. So again, it kind of just takes the original model that we used when we set up the fund and then says, okay, if we back off the gas a little bit, we do a supplemental appropriation. This is what sort of a pro forma result is. Again, this is sort of using, playing the fund balance game. Fund balance, you're addressing future liabilities. You're using fund balance to maximize your return, and you're also using it in a way that has basically been seen as a positive by our bond rating agencies when they look at what's called environmental, social, and governance. This exercise is deemed to be a good exercise. So, and again, well, as Michael said in his presentation, tune out the forecast, but there's been some talk. Again, I don't try to react to the headlines as the governor has warned everybody to do, but is FEMA, what if FEMA changes their reimbursement rates, for example, and what if FEMA's slower on processing these claims? Well, this is another funding source in addition to the things I mentioned earlier. So I think it's a prudent use. It's consistent with a philosophy that the town has when they set it up, and like I said, it actually helps the fund in the long run while actually helping us in the next couple of years in terms of our taxing requirements.
Thanks, Jim. So this would be amount of $750,000 from fund balance, transfer to the Coastal Resiliency Fund, and proposed resolution would be that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in appropriation for fiscal 2025 from $136,817,612 to $137,567,612. This increase will be funded through an appropriation from fund balance and used to supplement the Coastal Resiliency Fund.
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Make that motion.
Me.
That was moved by Pam. You want to second that, Yvette?
Sure.
Okay, second by Yvette. Discussion? Thanks, Jim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. Next is to consider if appropriate approve the following resolution: transfer assigning a portion of fund balance for identifiable needs for an accurate cost estimate, for which a accurate cost estimate is unavailable. So this is your next chapter here, Jim.
So in this case, the assignment is similar to if you had, money in a bank account and you wanted to assign some of it for maybe a wedding or your child's education. You don't know exactly how much it's going to cost, but you know that that balance in your checking account is probably overstated unless you make some allowance for that. And again, that's what the assignment does. Again, it's not as strong as an appropriation. As I said earlier, the engagement could get broken off, but it does basically communicate to the public that there are actually plans for this. And so the first one is Blackstone Library. So I met with the library in January, and they had discussed with me some of the needs that I've identified at the library. I believe in your package that was shared with you, you saw some pictures of that, and we were talking about possible strategies to do that. There was some talk about maybe funding the library's capital at a higher rate for next year. But I think the question that would come up is, well, how much is it going to cost? And at that point, the answer may not be known. So this is where we went slightly in a different direction on the assignment aspect. And the assignment aspect is to say, I don't know what this is going to cost, but at the present time, and it is somewhat of a guess, but I know that water coming from ceilings, floors, and walls is not a good thing. And hopefully it's less than this, and we could just unassign it. But the thought is it might be wise to start setting aside some money for that purpose. So the amount of the resolution for the board's assignment is $400,000, and the folks are from the library here tonight to kind of give you a brief overview of what they're encountering, and maybe if there's an update to when we met in January.
Sure. You want to come forward?
A lot of stuff going around right now.
Yeah, sure. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm Katie McNichol. I'm the director of the library. This is Michelle Blank. She's the chair of our Building and Grounds Committee. In about the fall of 2023, we noticed in our children's play area, some of the floor carpet tiles were coming away from the floor. The gypsum subfloor underneath the adhesive was starting to crumble. So we identified this area and went back to the contractor who had worked on the renovation, which was done in 2018. They had redone that room, redone the carpet there. And so they put us in touch with the flooring people who laid that carpet. They came out and took a look at it and suggested trying to patch this one area, redo, scrape up, and relay the adhesive, relay the carpets. So we did that. After a while, that started failing also. So we had the flooring people come back out, and in that time, in the interim period, we identified another spot on the floor where the same thing was happening, complete opposite side of this ground floor. And this is the original concrete. It's the basement slab. From my understanding, back in 2018, this was not an issue. When they were laying that carpet, nothing was identified. The contractor, when we spoke to them, said that they would have done moisture testing at that time, but it's not required to have a moisture barrier for laying carpet, so they wouldn't have done that. So when we had the flooring people come back out, they talked about doing some moisture testing. His estimation was that what likely happened was, with the really heavy rains that we had the summer of 2023, water came up from under the basement slab and pushed minerals and salts up, and that ended up crumbling these pieces of the gypsum subfloor. We don't have an active leak that we can tell, but it's just this crumbling piece. Around this time, for years, we've had portions of the ceiling. It's always in those flat, the curved wings with the flat roofs on the side. So there's, in the corners on each end, there's kind of plaster crumbling right underneath the ceiling. And we do regular maintenance of clearing debris from the roofs. We had a roofer come out and take a look, and he thinks that the problem could be solved by redoing those flat roofs. And then there's another piece of the building in the auditorium. There's these green rooms on either side, and on one of the little green rooms, underneath where the dome had been repaired in 2020, there's this one piece of the wall where, in one of the attached photos, you can see the paint has just kind of bubbled out and sagged. That's not active. Every time it rains, I go and check it. It's not wet now, but we're thinking that there was a couple of weeks of kind of sideways driving rain. There may be something somewhere it leaked. So we kind of have these multiple issues. The flooring company put together a proposal for this basement slab to redo the entire floor. The worst case scenario is we grind down 3/4 of an inch of the concrete, lay a moisture barrier, relay everything. Their proposal is over $140,000, and that does not include moving anything, re-milling the doors, because the floor would end up at a different level, so that would have to be done. Like, we don't want to have to do that if we don't have to. So when we got that proposal, kind of taking that into account with all of the other projects that we're seeing, we realized there are some big repair projects coming up, but we first want to engage a firm to do a study so that they can take a look at all of these water infiltration issues and really identify the root cause and give us recommendations, cheap, more expensive, most expensive, so that we can then determine what the best course of action is. So first we'd like to look at doing this study, kind of working with an architect, going back to the contractor who worked on the renovation, just to see, make sure that everything that needed to be done to code was done, all the appropriate testing was done, and then we can move forward with some actual quotes and some real numbers.
Thanks, Katie. Jamie, who was the contractor on this?
Downs?
Downs.
Downs.
Yep.
Downs. And who was the town's representative? Clerk of the Works on this, or?
Well, we had the town engineer sat on the building committee, and it's still
John Hofferly.
No,
John.
I don't think whoever he used to work for was involved with the renovation, but now John is on the committee.
Yeah, John was there.
Yeah. So do we have any town person who was there, clerk of the works, or representing as the owner's representative or anything on that project?
On that project,
Yeah.
yes. That was the town engineer was involved and attended some of those meetings.
Okay.
And they have since kept a buildings and grounds, or maybe they had it before, but asked the town engineer to participate in their meetings. Monthly? Is that monthly, I believe you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. No, it's just disappointing because we put a lot of money in that building. It's a beautiful building, but it seems like we're always chasing the solution, and sometimes you're not sure if it's the workmanship or the quality of the work or the quality of the materials that they put in there.
Yep.
I will just say, Joe, being my recollection from that previous project, I knew there were some issues with around the roof, which the contractor felt that those were addressed, and it sounds like there still may be some areas where it's starting to penetrate again, which that is one that historically the library always has to chase. But I don't ever recall moisture or water infiltration on the lower level ever being an issue until
Prior to this.
Prior to
that's my understanding too. So.
Yeah, there was, when I've been there 14 years, there was carpet down there before the renovation. It was not.
No issue.
No. I would, go ahead.
Sorry.
I would imagine when they pulled that carpet up, if there was an issue, it would have been identified and addressed at that time, and I don't recall anything coming up about that.
Is there anything done to the outside of the building? Did we change landscaping, grading? Because I know it happened to me because I changed landscaping and I got that crumbling in my basement.
Yeah. I know it's been kind of mentioned that maybe, if there's a gutter that's broken and dropping more water on the side, to everything that we've seen, we haven't seen any issues different on the outside. The land hasn't been graded, but again, that might come up in a study where they would take a look at that and see if there is something exterior to the building, or if it's really the walls in that basement area are intact. There's no evidence of water seeping through the walls. It's really seems to be coming up.
Subsurface.
Yeah.
So would the study be done for the entire building or just the floor?
I think the prudent approach at this point would be to look at the entire building, probably focused on these problem areas, but because they're all over, it would be good to really take a look at that, kind of getting out ahead of any issues. It's a 129-year-old building, and we are, 1996 was the last major renovation, and then 2018 was the last renovation. So we're like 30 years and 8 years out from these renovations. So time, climate change, all these things do have an effect on this building.
I would tend to think that you would want to get a consultant to study all those problems. I would not bring Dows into the fold until your independent consultant came up with your solutions or your issues.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like we've revisited this several years back where we had that water on the back auditorium. We had fixed that roof, so I think all those areas need to be addressed and looked at.
Yeah.
Gutters, roofing, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I'd suggest you do that in coordination, obviously, with the First Selectman's office and town engineer, so we make sure we're getting the right people looking at this.
Yeah, John he's been a great resource for us on the Building and Grounds Committee. When we need names of contractors, he's, helpful in sharing those. So we definitely look for the town's expertise.
Okay, with that, I'm going to read this. Resolve that the Board of Finance assign $400,000 to create a reservation of fund balance for anticipated repairs to Blackstone Library.
Can I just ask one question, Joe?
Sure.
We didn't talk about the heating and cooling system. I mean, I know it's beyond its useful life. Are you going to be getting an estimate to improve, replace, or?
Yeah, I think that's another thing that we should have looked at. We had the chiller replaced in 2021 around, but there's so many other pieces of that mechanical and the boilers, so we definitely need an engineer to come take a look at that and give us an estimate of and a plan for replacement, so we can prepare. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was a little premature. So you got the what's the abatement? We got lead abatement?
In touring the building, we noticed in this back staff area, there's some older tiles that were not addressed. It's a part of the room that was not addressed in the renovation, and John Hofferly said, you might want to have those looked at because those could be asbestos tiles, and if we're doing some repair work and the tiles get chipped, we'll have to make sure we have some abatement in there.
Got it. Okay. And anything else that's, you got air handling, you've got new ceiling and grids. Those are other capital requests or items.
Those are going to be some things that,
down the road.
Right, so we sort of had two categories of projects that we think we can handle, okay, funding that we don't have to have extra funding from the town for. But the water infiltration, the abatement, and as you point out, the heating and whatever are the ones that we think we're going to need town assistance on.
Okay. Questions from the board on this? There's a lot to absorb here. I assume you've got numbers on all of these other items as well that you're spending money?
Some things, yeah, as they come up.
Maybe when we can look further at this during budget time as well, just to get a handle on it.
Yeah.
I think that'd be helpful, because we are the major funder of it, no matter if it's part of your operating budget or not.
Absolutely.
It's still basically not close to 90% or more, right? That we're up to
89%.
89, yeah. Okay, keep it below there. Okay, I did read that resolution to move $400,000 to an assignment reservation of fund balance. Is the pleasure of the board.
I'll move it.
Moved by Jeff.
I'll second.
Second by Deborah. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All set. Thank you for the information.
Absolutely.
And good luck with the problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Jim, on to the engineering piece of it.
Yeah, the engineering assignment is really, the strategy there is to provide opportunities for local matches, which could improve their chances of securing fund. And it also, some of these projects may need additional dollars because, when they come out, when the items actually go out to bid, depending on what's happening in the supply market, et cetera, some of these items could actually cost more than what we're estimating, or more than what the the grant, even with the local match covers. Unfortunately, John Hefferly is out with the flu today, and Jennifer has drawn the short straw from the engineering department. So it's probably a good segue from the library to the engineering department. So she's here. And you did see in your package that John did send a letter where he talks about some of the funding required, and you can see that the sum of that basically adds up to the assignment, the $1,690,000. And again, I will say that Jen, John, and Kevin Ortiz, which was a position that was added a couple years ago, have been aggressive in applying for grants. They reminded me today I had to go on the computer and sign in for a grant to release a grant application this afternoon, actually. And so, they don't always get them, but it's not for lack of trying. So with that, Jen.
Thanks. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening. Jennifer Aquino, Assistant Town Engineer. So Jim, kind of went through everything we had here in John's letter. So kind of from a bigger picture, we have 9 grants that have been awarded. We have 3 additional that are pending right now, a total of $19 million that we've received in grant money thus far, plus the awards that we're waiting to hear on. Kevin's been really aggressive with his grant applications and spends a lot of time doing that, and it's been pretty successful for us. What we're looking for, the 4 grants specifically for the reservation of funding, the Trolley Trail Bridge improvements, which was the CT Trails grant. We asked for $400,000, and that number was based on prior awards. That was about the average award that was done, so we chose to be more competitive with that, to have the ask be about $400,000 with the project estimate at $750,000. We do have a current $100,000 appropriation, so we're looking for an increase in the appropriation for that. The Stony Creek Wharf repairs was a SHIP grant from 2024. The estimate is $1 million, and the local match is $200,000 on that. That was originated from a study that was done by Race Coastal Engineering, looking at the entirety of the wharf, the wooden part of the wharf down in Stony Creek, giving us a condition of that and making recommendations for the repairs that need to be made to that. The Town Center Sidewalk Rehabilitation is a steep grant, a 25 steep grant that was applied for this month. And that would be the kind of supplement to the Main Street project that'll be starting this spring. And this would include the sidewalk replacement for all the side streets that would connect into Main Street. And that is just applied for and pending. And then today, as Jim alluded to, Kevin submitted for the Linden Avenue grant. It's a PROTECT grant, which is for the resiliency of Linden Avenue in the area where it is subject to erosion. And that project estimate is $5.2 million. It's got a $1,040,000 match to it. So that's the total of what we're asking for the reservation. And if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to help. And just keep in mind that these are, we do our best to try and get the estimate to cover the cost, but there is...
They're estimates.
They are estimates, so depending on what those bids come in at, there could be adjustments to the local match.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. Questions from the board on this? So I'll read the proposed resolution. Resolve that the Board of Finance assign $1,690,000 to create a reservation of fund balance for engineering department's anticipated grant match requirements.
I'll move it.
Moved by Harry.
Second.
Second by Jeff. Is there discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Actually, I just have a question for Jim. Just like, for instance, the Linden Avenue project with the erosion, does that fall under coastal resiliency at all, or?
It could. The Coastal Resiliency Fund, by definition, could be used for that. But when you see the amount of that project, it's fairly substantial. And so, in that model, whereas and again, it's somewhat arbitrary, but we don't want to totally exhaust the fund using that 15%. It wouldn't meet all of that. But I think it's a good question because it illustrates sort of the kind of nature of that fund. So for example, if grants fall short or we have the ability to bond, but we also have the ability, if we wanted to supplement a piece of it with the coastal resiliency fund, it certainly would do that as well. So in a pinch, it could alleviate some of that burden. Yeah.
Thanks.
Right. It's just a larger project here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Anything else? We're good to move to Board of Ed federal funds. Jim, you've...
Yeah, and Blaze is here as well. If there's, I could address it conceptually in terms of global dollars that I've looked at. Blaze is much closer to the details of the Title I staffing, but the origin story here is when, like every government official in early mid-January, trying to decipher some of the directions that were coming from the Federal Office of Policy and Management, and what would be the impact. So Blaze and I had a conversation about it. I was looking at our 23 audit, and I saw that basically, the first one I looked at, I was like, oh my God, we had $7 million worth of federal funding that year. And then as I started looking at it, that was my first 5-second reaction to it. As I started looking at it a little more closely, I was like, well, you have to start backing out the ESSER, you have to start backing out ARPA, the things that we knew were going to go away. And it was roughly about $3.8 million when you netted those things out. Most of that is on the Board of Ed side, really. It's, for food and nutrition programs, Title I, special ed, et cetera. And so the thought was similar to what was done, and I'm just looking at the board now, realizing it probably was just Joe and Jeff that were back in, was it 2017, I think it was, or 18, where basically we had for those who might remember, basically the state of Connecticut was going to zero out Branford's state aid. And we had to set a mill rate, the state budget wasn't adopted. And at that time, because of where we were in the process, we basically offset state aid with an appropriation from fund balance. We saw that as somewhat of an asymmetrical risk that we can do this, and the likelihood of it happening wasn't. If it didn't happen, then we wouldn't want to overtax people for it. If it did happen, we had made provisions for it. I think philosophically, I think this is a similar type of approach. I mentioned before it was close to $4 million, 3.8. The assignment is $3 million, and I think lots of times when you're trying to fund things against a risk, it probably would be overfunding to do the full amount, because in reality it probably will not be 100% wiped out, right? The other thing I think it's important to underscore is my sense is that the state of Connecticut would try to alleviate some of the risk of the loss of federal funding. It's also important to recognize that unlike the town, who basically does property taxes and fee income, the state of Connecticut, as you might guess, has much broader taxing power. So they have other opportunities and tools if they choose to use them to alleviate the burden on that. But I think $3 million is significant, and it basically, if this were to happen, and if it seemed to be that this is something that's going to go on for years, then the town could basically, similar to what we did with the sinking fund, is almost do like a glide path, right? So we would say, okay, if we lost $4 million, well, might we say, okay, we're going to use so much from the assignment, we pull it out and then bring it officially into the budget to offset some of that, and then we have to do some of it with taxes and some of it with the smaller state package to offset that, and work those three sides of the triangle to the point where we would eventually wean off it in a worst case scenario in which the government were to phase it out. And so that's really the strategy. Again, the assignment aspect is, it could happen. You can't really put your finger on an exact amount. So essentially what we're doing is reserving, let's just round up to $4 million, 3/4 of that exposure.
Okay, questions from Jim on this? Not all good. Read the resolution here. Resolve that the Board of Finance assign $3 million to create a reservation of fund balance to assist the town in establishing a plan to gradually reduce the reliance on these programs of federal funds if this funding is reduced or withdrawn completely. It's also worth noting that we would anticipate some additional assistance from the state under this scenario, since the state has broader taxing powers than Branford. That's a good resolution, Jim. I know you put that one together. Jeff moved it. Yeah. Jeff moved it.
I'll second.
Seconded by Deborah. Approval by Jim. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
On that one, okay. Item number 13 is to the Board of Ed's request to use prior year balances to offset the fiscal 26 tax requirements. Blaze, you want to come up? Chris? And we have a letter here from the superintendent. So this is to have the $675,000 non-lapsing in fiscal 24-25.
Yeah, this is to establish a non-lapsing account really from fiscal 25's budget for fiscal year, to be used in fiscal year 2026.
Yes.
Yep. When the Board of Ed passed their budget, there was an assumption of this basically in it to help kind of offset some of the essential service increases. We're continuing to propose using non-lapsing funds, as well as really making some intentional efforts to have these non-lapsing funds available for ESS, which is the mental health services being provided at Walsh again that are outsourced, as well as substitute staffing. Sub-staffing really continues to place a significant pressure, a growing pressure on the budget, and post-COVID there's really, it's almost doubled, and there's really not been a reduction. This is following kind of a statewide trend in increased subutilization. So we've been in talks with our outsourced agency on how we can minimize some of those expenses, but the non-lapsing fund would be to cover those two specific expenses.
Those are the same two items that we had in the non-lapsing last year.
Okay.
We're currently using the non-lapsing, the $437,000 from fiscal 24 and fiscal 25. I think you just got the invoices.
Okay. Questions on this? Harry, you good?
Yep.
I'll move, Joe. This is the second time we're doing this, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Motion's been made by Jeff.
Second.
Seconded by Harry. Discussion. And the resolution, I'll read this. Just to reiterate, resolve that the Board of Finance, in accordance with the Connecticut statutes 10-248A, will establish a non-lapsing account for the unspent Board of Ed operating funds from fiscal 25 in the amount not to exceed $675,000. These funds will be used to provide mental health services and substitute staffing, which were previously funded through pandemic relief grants, and that is from the general fund, the increase of the fund balance 675 to the non-lapsing Board of Ed fund of $675,000, and within the fund, transfer in and the authorization to expend the money for the non-personnel of $675,000. So that's the recap on the resolution that's been made and seconded. Is there any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a big thanks to Jim and Catherine. We work very closely, and on both of those, he's really forward-thinking in a lot of this risk reduction, and it's a huge thanks to the town team. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Chris, thank you. Okay. Item number 14 is to consider if appropriate approve the following resolution and transfer utilizing reserves to reduce liabilities and smooth out costs that experience a high level of volatility. I will read through this. Medical self-insurance fund, increase of fund balance of $8,500,000, and transfer out the general fund $8,500,000. And within the general fund, increase on the revenue side of $6.5 million, and retirement for police pension, $6.5 million. Resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the RTM an increase in appropriations from $136,567,612 to $146,067,612. This increase will be funded through an appropriation from fund balance and will be used to supplement the police pension fund. And then the supplemental piece of that is resolved that the Board of Finance assigned $1 million to create a reservation of fund balance for future health insurance costs. So with that as backdrop, Jim, you want to provide us with the other details?
Sure. As you said in the introduction, part of this is to reduce liabilities. That's the pension side. And to smooth out costs that potentially could have a high degree of volatility, basically being health insurance costs. So as the board is aware that the town of Branford started moving out of its self-insurance fund approach to medical claims, medical and RX. A few years ago, Board of Ed did it more recently, but also over a year ago. And so those costs are now being premium-based through the state of Connecticut's partnership plan. The last piece that is still where we're funding claims is on the dental side. But the dental side is relatively small, and it's somewhat predictable because, you know, there is like a max, as I said in my letter. I said that there's built-in caps, no pun intended, and so therefore you can't. They're vastly more predictable. On the Board of Ed side, you know, it's probably close to $300,000. On the town side, it's probably about $125,000. So as we transition out of the self-insurance fund, and there'll be probably another step to this down the road, is that you know, we feel we could actually put these in our budget in the general fund, and then if we're short, we would do a transfer. If we're under, obviously that money would lapse and offset any other accounts that went over. And so, so the 8.5 is basically coming into to the general fund as a revenue, and 6.5 is going out as a transfer out to the pension fund. And then $1 million is getting reserved, and then the other $1 million is still obviously going to be in the general fund, which, you know, is also helping to do some of the other things that we're talking about on the agenda tonight. As Michael Poor, our pension advisor, had talked about, it gives us an opportunity to take a second look at our investment policy statement. It gives us a chance to immunize more years' worth of liabilities. And it also, as I mentioned, gives us an opportunity to take a small haircut in next year's appropriation. I think it was 2014, the Board of Finance approved the pension funding policy, which basically calls for that we fund 100%, but no less than 90% of the required contribution. The required contribution will not be recalculated until there's another valuation. So the type of relief we could get in next year's budget is roughly $170,000. But one of the things it does do, in addition to allowing us to immunize more years, there's one of the things in one of the charts Michael had given me, it's a lower standard deviation as well, so there's less volatility. But it also, looking at future years, allows us to, you know, kind of a pro forma chart that's attached to the memo, showing, you know, what our funding requirements would be if we did nothing, and what our funding requirements would be with the supplemental. and you can see it has some advantages. I will caution folks, though, depending on what happens in the next year or so, or between now and the end of the year, when we do our valuation, those numbers could be a little bit different, could be better or worse. But what it does show is it's like if you're paying down an extra payment on your mortgage and you get to reset your contribution, which generally you don't on a mortgage, but if you could, then your mortgage payment would go down. And essentially, the pension fund works the same way. And then, of course, the other $1 million is, if all of a sudden we get a year where, medical costs for the partnership go through the roof, then we have, we would basically appropriate out of that assignment as opposed to taxing for it. So that's the volatility of costs, and the pension aspect is reducing the liability. So.
Thanks, Jim. Questions on this proposal to move the $8.5 million from the medical self-insurance fund into the general fund, and then allocate $16.5 million to police retirement fund and reservation within fund balance of $1 million for the health insurance costs.
I'll move it.
Moved by Harry.
Second.
Second by Jeff. Is there discussion? Questions from Jim? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Item number 15 is to consider and if appropriate approve the following proposed bond resolution. Resolved that the resolution entitled Resolution Authorizing an Appropriation of $5.3 million for the fire equipment project and the financing of said appropriation by the issuance of general obligation bonds of the town and notes in anticipation of such bonds in the amount of not to exceed adopted and recommended for adoption by the representative town meeting. Welcome, Chief.
Happy birthday, Joe.
Oh, thank you.
So maybe I'll just kick it off a little bit, and the Chief can talk to the specific purchases. And this sort of recaps a discussion that we had at a Board of Finance meeting a few months back, and we talked about using the sinking funds to make apparatus purchases, and it worked reasonably well when prices were stable and project lead times were relatively short. But now we're in an environment where prices have escalated, lead times are longer, and so you may recall we added another $500,000 contribution in the last year. Absent this, the Chief would be looking for, I think, north of $1 million in next year's budget to try to fulfill the plan. And so if you kind of maintain part of the pay-as-you-go, I think the handout, which is kind of basically the Chief's apparatus plan amended for the bond resolution is, so the bond resolution actually includes the estimated debt plus the pay-as-you-go piece, because that's typically how the lawyers write the bond resolutions. And when you see, in color, the bond authorization would basically be the $4,250,000. If we were to issue $4,250,000, we're not going to issue that up front. But what it does do is bond resolutions do two things. One, there's the appropriation, which is legal authority to spend, and the other is the ability to borrow to finance it. And our resolutions are written so that borrowing could be offset by grants or other typically pay-as-you-go projects. So kind of is a hybrid approach here. And the other thing, the bond authorization, because it allows us to spend money, it also allows us to obligate the town. So, for example, the Chief could basically sign a contract for equipment that he won't receive for a number of years. And so it allows us to order things, but realistically, we're only going to borrow to what our cash flow is. So essentially, we're using a bond authorization. I guess probably an appropriate analogy would be almost like a letter of credit. And so we have the ability to, except we're not drawing funds on it. It's really just there as kind of the co-signer to our pay-as-you-go piece. As far as the equipment goes, you'll see that, there's some big pieces of equipment there. You got the 97 engine, you got the ladder truck, and you have the emergent engine 4, the emergency unit as well. And so, you'll notice that the Chevy Tahoes that are in there, well, that's not going to be bonded. Obviously, that will come out of the $1,050,000 pay-as-you-go. But I think what also is worth highlighting is when you look at budgeted appropriation in the 24-25 year, it's $1 million, and the years out, you can see that that's significantly lower. So that's where we have some relief on some of the pressure. Now, arguably, we would pay some of this back in terms of debt service costs, but again, we have some flexibility with the timing with the debt service as well, because it really is tied more to the cash flows. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the letter of credit analogy is good. It enables to recognize the need and sign for a contract, which the contracts are long-term for delivery.
Right.
So do you have more to add on this, Chief?
Just a reminder, as I've come before the board for the last almost 10 years now, I've kind of been warning of this kind of time where 4 major pieces of apparatus were purchased almost 29 years ago, 28 years ago, starting 28 years ago, and then, it was between 1997 and 2001, we bought those pieces of apparatus. So this is the time that they're all coming due. We're trying to spread this out a little bit, and of course, the unanticipated piece was the inflationary environment where the apparatus we purchased in 2022 is now 40% more than it was in just that short period of time. And the deliveries, especially for like a ladder truck, are out 4 years now. So we can place the order and sign the contract and get the apparatus actually delivered in the year that we had anticipated to replace it. So that's some of our goals. And I appreciate how Director Finch, as usual, has come up with a way to be able to address this, which is a little bit less impactful in light of all the other liabilities the town has.
Sure. So these, there's, maybe if you just recap for us which are going to be purchased when. I see that in 27, 28, you're anticipating, I guess, delivery of the E1?
Yes, so we already purchased and signed a contract in 2022. That's due to be delivered in December of 25, so that's engine 1. Basically, the commission has gotten back to doing, and we got a little bit off track when we purchased these in 1997. Volunteer units typically have a much slower and less impactful use, right? Because they're not doing nearly as many calls. So after we purchased engine 5 in 2018, which is the Stony Creek engine, we started focusing on, we'll replace the busier and highest mileage career engine and then move that down to replace the volunteer engines. So they're a little bit mislabeled, but essentially engine 1 is then ordered to be replaced, delivered in December. Engine 9, which is the 2001. It's actually not our oldest, but it is one of the worst shape engines we have. That's ordered, and it's going to be probably a 27 delivery. And then we would anticipate replacing engine 2, but really that is in actuality going to be the next career piece, and we would just move the oldest career piece to replace engine 2, and subsequently engine 4. So Short Beach and MP Rice. And then the rescue, what we don't need to do anymore is that in 1999 we had a very vibrant volunteer rescue squad. They no longer exist. We still have equipment that we carry on the vehicle, but we we don't need a custom-built fire engine that would push $1 million, right? So we're kind of going to the box truck. We just need a big storage unit that can drive to the scene. We're single driver. We don't need to have, like the current rescue truck has seating for 6 firefighters and air packs, and, it's kind of a dual-rolled piece. We just need an equipment vehicle to get that bulky, heavy equipment from the firehouse to the scene in those kind of what we would consider high-risk, low-frequency type events, but the equipment is bulky. It's not what we would use every day.
Right.
So that would be just a commercial box truck style with just some lift gate and some customizations to carry all that equipment.
Okay. Questions?
I do have a question. So Chief, engine 4 is engine 1 now?
No, I put engine 1 because we're replacing what is the 1997 engine that's currently in Short Beach. We would replace engine 1 and then take the career engine 1 and move that down to the slower volunteer pieces. For instance, currently, and I didn't bring it with me, but it's I always send it to you guys as part of our budget package, is the mileage and the year of the apparatus. So the current engine 1 is a 2015, if I'm not mistaken. It's got 97,000 miles. The 1997 engine that's in Short Beach right now has about 36,000 miles. So the career engine gets used a lot more.
Is that station closed now?
It's combined with, when we opened Station 9 with the new staffing model, we combined the volunteers from 9's, Engine 2 and Engine 4 are kind of operating as one company now. But they're running those 2 engines.
There's a truck down there, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Tom, on the purchase contracts, are there any price protections, or could we be facing a higher final cost 3 years from now?
There could be. I don't have the document with you, but when we did the last purchase, there was a calculation for escalation that wouldn't exceed I don't really recall what the number was, but I could certainly get that to you. Yes, there could be an increase, but it was limited. So the price that they quote at the time isn't 100% guaranteed, but it's also not going to escalate beyond, like double or anything even close to that. But I'll provide that previous contract just so you have some idea what that could be.
Thank you.
Could that increase be mitigated by a trade-in?
It could be. Like, for instance, I think we could get, especially in light of the used apparatus has a higher value than it used to. We quite frankly didn't get a lot of even interest in some of the apparatus when we tried to sell it outright, or the dealers don't really take a trade-in, but the aftermarket people do, but it's not a lot. But I think in the environment we're working in right now, where apparatus is hard to come by, like, for instance, the city of Middletown had to buy a used piece of apparatus just to get by between the order and it being delivered. So I think what I'm trying to say is the value is probably a little bit higher than what we had been accustomed to, especially for that rescue truck. I think we could just sell that outright and make a fair amount of money back. I couldn't begin to tell you what it is right now because we haven't entered it.
So, Chief, just for a recap, on the 3 apparatus that are listed here to make up the 5.3, just when would we sign contracts for those, or have we contracts?
So in the spreadsheet, I think I have
like the Engine 2, 1997 Engine 2.
Exactly, and then in the ladder truck would be this year, and then the next one wouldn't be out until the 27-28 timeframe.
So that's when you'd sign the contract?
Yes.
So that's, okay, so the Engine 4 is 2027, the 2009 ladder truck 1 is, you anticipate this
Yeah, but that's a longer delivery, so, that we kind of moved that up a little bit than we had normally would have asked for it.
And the 97 E2?
That we would sign after July.
Okay, so that would be 2026.
Yeah.
Okay, so as Jim pointed out, there's like a letter of credit which enables them to enter into those contracts, and then it's up to the town to figure out the best way to finance them, which may be through budgetary process, through debt, or through allocation of fund balance. Okay. Questions from the chief?
Actually, real quick, Tom, are there any grants available for the purchase of equipment? Anything that would come from the state or the federal government?
There's always a possibility in the AFG grants, which is the Assistance to Firefighter grants, which we apply for every year. We did apply for apparatus in 1 year.
Did we get anything?
We didn't. Basically, it's like when it comes to the apparatus part of the grant, it's been kind of the analogy is like playing the slot machine, right? You're lucky if you get it. We kind of felt that we would be more successful in purchasing other things using that process. For instance, we got the training grant through that process, where this year we applied for an exhaust system for the Indian Neck Station. It doesn't have a point of capture exhaust, it has kind of a filtration exhaust. So now that we have people living in the station, we felt that that was an important safety, kind of a guaranteed grant as long as, you know, they remain solvent. Right now we're a little unsure what's going to happen with the federal government, but we've had a lot of successful in that, but apparatus is probably not. Quite frankly, one of the obstacles that we have is that we have a AAA bond rating and we have a sunshine fund and we have sinking funds, and that goes against our, I think last year we tried to, or one of the things we wanted to consider was replacing, like, seeing if we could find a way to take the breathing apparatus sinking fund and kind of reallocate that into the apparatus sinking fund to address some of these things. And we just felt that would be a little bit convoluted, and we would have to, you have to be honest in your grant application, right? So that would be a little like sleight of hand that I didn't feel was, we considered it for a second, and then we said, no, that's probably not going to fly, because they are, they do check all of these things. They check your bank accounts. They check your if you say you don't have money for this, you have to show a financial need. We can't have money for it. So.
Okay. Other questions? Now, first, I'll entertain a motion that would enable us to waive me reading the full resolution.
I'll move it.
Been moved.
Second.
Second by Harry.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. And then I'll read the resolution one more time. The synopsis here is resolved that the resolution entitled Resolution Authorizing an Appropriation of $5.3 million for the fire equipment project and the financing of said appropriation by the issuance of general obligation bonds of the town and notes in anticipation of such bonds in the amount not to exceed $5.3 million, therefore be adopted and recommended for adoption by the representative town meeting.
I'll move it.
Moved by Pam.
I'll second.
Seconded by Jeff. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Chief. Good luck.
All right, thank you all. Appreciate it.
With no other business to come before the board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Whoops, Jim, what?
So, don't want to be a killjoy, but there were some other things in the letter I wanted to talk about but didn't require action for discussion purposes.
Sure.
His birthday, Jeff.
Yeah, I know. Well, Lisa brought him some cookies, though.
Yeah, that'll keep me happy.
I'll just...
Go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
I'll just be brief. When we talk about reserves, we're talking about reserves kind of in a broad sense. And so there was a couple things. So, for example, based on the reserves and the workers' comp fund and the reserves in the heart hypertension fund, we feel that we can reduce appropriations into the fund going forward. So we're not appropriating out of those funds fund balance. We just put less into them, and so that's how we accomplish that. The other point worth noting is, in the current year we appropriate $3 million from undesignated fund balance. in the general fund and $150,000 in the human services fund. I suspect you may revisit that given the circumstances in the year going forward. Also, when we talk about the town's bonding ability, we've had some discussions with the Board of Ed about possibly looking at some of their pay-as-you-go capital items, which were significant and beyond our ability to fund them next year, as possibly look at a small bond issue and working with the Board of Ed, or I'm sorry, the Superintendent's Office to prioritize those items as well. And then additionally, some of the things that we talked about in the past meetings, down the road, possibly selling assets to use the proceeds to offset costs. We are looking at possibly a way to take some of our reserves and invest them a little bit longer than currently we do. Something that Michael mentioned as a strategy in the pension fund. We may want to apply that as a strategy potentially in the general fund as well. And I realize, as looking at the agenda, that I guess I had to leave a little early on Friday, but basically I think I left the last page off of my memo, so depending on when I sent it to you, it might be missing a page. So what I will do is I'll distribute that page. The page didn't include any action items. It just talked about working with the Board of Ed and Bond Council to come up with potentially a small debt authorization for some of their capital needs, so it doesn't work at cross purposes with their facilities plan. And then I mentioned the revenue. And also, we talked about working with Branford's delegation to secure grants for the fire station. I think it might be worth noting that as we look at as myself, Joe, and Jamie participate in the school's planning committee, is one of the takeaways I think was that there are programs and rules for getting funding for school construction, but a lot of folks don't follow them. Their legislative delegation gets some special exceptions, and obviously a school project is more expensive than a fire project, so maybe that's where we ask our delegation to put the effort on as opposed to the firehouse. So firehouse, we wouldn't get grants, but the school, we would get a higher grant reimbursement percentage, so obviously in the end we would get more money. And so again, those are items discussed through the letter, but not requiring an action. So I just wanted to get that on the record. So
okay. Yeah, thanks, Jim. You did include there's a discussion with regards to the workers' comp trust and heart and hypertension, so that's duly noted. And we'll look for that, any supplemental pages if you want to send them to us, but that's good. And again, just reiterating, just thank you for the great work on this and the work you do and your team does every day. So
thank you.
It's a great asset for us, and we much appreciate it. Speaking for the board, I know that. So, okay, Jamie, you have anything?
No, just a great job all night, but we got a lot done. Certainly, this is, as Jim had noted at the beginning of the meeting, I think really this is just a continuation of really what this board has started discussing over a year ago. Meeting our needs, our liabilities, continue to provide programs and services in the challenging years. I know the board, every year, there's always seems to be new challenges. This is particularly challenging with the revow, which we understood we recognized early on as becoming. So we're fortunate through the work of the Finance Department, Jim and his board, that we're in a position where we have opportunities to lay out a strategy to keep the services and programs intact, we'll be mindful of the impact on the taxpayers. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. All right, now, item number 16, I'll reiterate, with no other business to come before the board, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Harry.
Motion been made and second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
Any event is not in your package.
Thanks.
There you go.
Program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.